So how will your green technology job creation program work?
So the part of what we're looking at doing is that there has been sort of economic development that's going on in the area of renewable energy, say, or you look at sort of high tech, and it's been happening. It's been developing on its own, has its own energy. What we think is that there's a role for the provincial government to play to accelerate that, and part of that is to provide support for entrepreneurs, particularly small and medium-sized businesses that really are more innovative, more creative, a little bit hungrier, have some really great ideas, and that's where most ideas kind of come from in the economy. Actually, they come out of small players. They don't come out of, we think, these big players like Google and Microsoft, that they generate all the great ideas, but if you actually look carefully, they've absorbed smaller players who've actually done all the really interesting, innovative work, and they've taken them into themselves as larger companies. So how do we support those really innovative projects? How do we give them support? How do we allow them to sort of stand on their own to get up and running? And those are really the big job creators too. So what we've announced is about $270 million investment in this one set of programs that are really about providing what we call incubators or accelerators. So kind of a place where if you have a really good idea, you can go and get coached and mentored by people who have already had some level of success, who know the industry, they know how to market stuff, they know how to deal with all the ins and outs of running a business and can support that. So that's a big part of it, and the other is just creating a climate for innovation. And one of the things we have going for us in BC is that we've got this incredible natural environment, we've got access to resources, we've got a very skilled, educated workforce. So there's no reason why we can't be very successful with this. We just need to kind of stimulate it more. We need to be more supportive of it. So.
All right, and we have our next question from Mason.
What does your platform mean by fair taxes for people of all ages?
So what's been happening here, and this is a larger question about taxation in general, but you're talking about more sort of generational issue around tax policy. But there has been slowly over time, and this has really been going on in not just BC but in North America since about the 70s, but there's been a shift of tax responsibility and tax burden that used to be held by those who had been the most successful in our economy. That's the top 1 to 10% of our population who've really done well as far as income. There used to be a lot of expectation of those people and companies to contribute a lot back to society. That's lessened over time, and so the burden of just getting the cost of being together and the cost of healthcare and education and social services, that has been borne more and more by the middle part of the income brackets, and now the lower part of the income brackets, and younger people who are just graduating from universities with their degrees or vocational training or apprenticeships. So we've downloaded the tax burden and spread it out among this group of people that we're saying as Greens that they shouldn't be the ones who are bearing the burden of supporting society, because the ones at the top end are actually the ones who've been the biggest beneficiaries of what the society has provided for them. They've also done the best, so they need to contribute more, and I guess it's a social value about the fact that we have a responsibility for one another. So where it gets into generational inequity is that the tax burden falls then on the younger, those who have less money, and we see it all over the place. One of the classic one in BC is that we charge people a medical services premium. So if you have to pay this flat tax in order to have pay into the healthcare system. Well, we know it penalizes the people who have the least amount of money. Because if you're making a huge amount of money, $65 or $130 for your family is nothing. But it's a huge amount if you're just barely getting by. So that's where the taxes really become unfair, and they really get downloaded onto the young, they get downloaded onto the elderly, seniors, they get downloaded onto those who are basically in the lower income brackets. That's what's happened. That's what's happened over time.
Okay, good question from Adrian.
Can you clarify your position on minimum wage?
What we're asking for when it comes to minimum wage is to sit down together and not make any kind of rash decisions based on just sort of a quick election line like $15 an hour minimum wage. When those numbers get thrown out, and they get thrown out during a campaign, I wonder, where does $15 come from? Who's made that decision? It's a nice round number, and I guess it's really good for a little sort of 10-second hit on television, but it lacks the kind of wisdom we need to really sit down and talk about it, because the minimum wage needs to go up in BC, no question about it. It needs to go up substantially in BC. But what we need to do is sit down and say, what's the effect? So what is the effect of a $15 minimum wage? Well, we don't know. The party that's advocating for that, it doesn't have a good description, it hasn't really done any research that I can see, and certainly none that they've communicated of where the number comes from. So I'm totally supportive of a higher minimum wage. I think when we talk about a $15 minimum wage, we might be in the ballpark, we might be actually, but it might be 17. It might be regional based on the cost of living, because we know that minimum wage provincially is a nice tidy way to do it. It's certainly simpler to administer, but it may not be the most representative and it may not be the most functional. So maybe we have to look at a different type of minimum wage. But these are ideas that need to be kicked around, and we also need to invite the businesses that depend on minimum wage workers to be part of that conversation to see what's the impact for them. Because what we don't want to have happen is push the minimum wage too fast, too high, and then find that we're actually suppressing employment, and we're actually making it harder for people to even be employed, period. So there's there's kind of a little tuning, balancing act there to do with minimum wage. You can't rush into it. You've got to do it with a kind of a calm wisdom, I think.
Great. All right, so our next topic is on education, and we have questions from Emily, Savannah, and Wyatt.
All right.
All right.
So you guys are talking about increasing funding and investing a lot of money into education, and I was just wondering, where's all this money coming from?
Yeah, that's the golden question, Wyatt. Yeah, where's the goose? It's going to lay the golden egg. It gets back to what I was talking about earlier about tax policy. I mean, I'll be able to. If you guys asked me to talk about this a week from now, or 2 weeks, or about a week or so from now, I could say a lot more, because our final sort of pieces of the platform are going to be released, including a real understanding of costing. But what I can tell you is that we're looking at a large transfer of funds, of wealth, and wealth that's been held by a small number of people in our society and who have done really well. And we're saying to them, you're going to have to pay more. You're going to have to contribute more for the success that you've had, which we've all provided for those that have done well. It's not like anyone's self-made wealthy. We're all in this together, and we've all benefited from it. So we're going to ask for that to happen, and that will take the place of a very much more progressive tax system, in which we're looking at a higher marginal tax rate. We're looking at really making BC a place of less inequality and lessen that gap between rich and poor. Because right now the way the game is rigged, if you're a have, you're doing really great. If you're a have-not, you're not doing so hot, and it's getting worse. And the haves are accumulating more, and the have-nots are receiving less. Every economic analysis can show you this over the last few decades. It's blatantly in front of us, but to deal with it and to say the best way we can deal with this is actually education is probably the number one way to do this transfer, this challenge of inequality, and to create the kind of conditions where you're able to activate all the resources in the community, including the human resources that we all have, and bring to it all our skills, all our abilities. And there's so much untapped when you have tuition out of control, and not the inability to even consider going to school for a lot of people now. Or if you go to school, you're going to be loaded up with debt at the end. You don't even know you're going to have a job when you graduate with this debt. It's risky. And that's not the way to encourage the kind of economic growth and human potential that we have in our society. So that's where the money's going to come from. It's going to come from those who have done well. Now, you have to be, again, it gets back to what we talked about with minimum wage. There's a balancing act here. If you go too high, especially about capital tax, you can suppress business investment, so you have to get this right. But that's really where we're talking about a huge investment, because the numbers we're offering for education investment are large. It's a substantial reinvestment into education. The other problem is we're doing catch-up, because it hasn't happened. I mean, it's been incremental. I mean, since and I know I'm not supposed to say too many negative things about previous government or the other parties. What I will say is education has been chronically underfunded. I mean, chronically underfunded. There's no question. For the type of changes that we're facing together as a society and how much more we need to be responsive, we're just not set up well for it. And we've got schools, just even the physical nature of our schools need a massive reinvestment, let alone the human resources. All of us as recipients of education, as people, So that's going to be a big challenge for us, is going to be having that wealth redistributed back in and lessening that equality gap.
Alright, so we'll press on with our next question. Okay, you're proposing a $2,000 a year for tax forgiveness for student loans. So how does this work?
So when you graduate, you're working, and you're getting those sort of first salary or wages in, you're going to get taxed on that. You have income tax on that. So we're talking about a $2,000 a year tax forgiveness, basically as a form of credit, and you would minimize then your taxes for those first 5 years.
Oh.
Yeah, and that would accumulate up to $10,000 if you were, in a high enough bracket, you were earning enough money, and you could maximize that potential. It's really to allow people then to take that $10,000 and put it against your student loan or just your cost of living, and be able to at least get a start. And in some ways, if you look at our education platform in the post-secondary side of it, that program and another one about a much more robust provincial grant program for post-secondary education, those are initial programs, initial launches of some response to what's going on. But we're actually calling for a task force to look at post-secondary education in general. And I think part of what that's going to involve is really looking at tuition and student debt in a much more comprehensive way than we've been dealing with it. And then also do with the funding to universities as well and colleges and what we're providing for them. So it's a bigger, much bigger conversation. So those are just kind of some initial ideas and some things, some programs that Green government would launch right away.
So what are the cost estimates for this program?
For which program? The education?
For the tax forgiveness program?
I can't, the numbers off the top of my head. I think something like 10 million, I think, is the total price tag on that. I have to look it up. Sorry, you got me without a number in my head. But I know it's somewhere in that price range, I think. Yeah.
Your next question?
Currently, the education budget includes $383 million funding the private school. What will happen to that part of the budget if you get elected?
So both the Greens, the NDP, Liberals, all of us in this election, no one's really talking about changing the formula for private schools. So that funding would be consistent with what you would expect from any of the three parties. None of us have really challenged that idea. So we're not talking about increasing the private school funding, we're not talking about decreasing the private school funding. That's kind of where we all land on that one.
149 million for teacher training on the new curriculum, 35 million for the nutrition program, and the 65 million over 4 years to facilitate and work experience programs for high school and co-op programs and undergrads. So are all these programs funded over the above and the proposed $6.36 billion annual budget?
They are. Those are additional dollars.
Oh.
So really, we're looking at those programs in particular, responding to the needs that were identified. The one about the need for teachers to really get up to speed with the new curriculum and be able to receive some good mentoring and some good training around the new curriculum, and then matching that actually with resources that the new curriculum is going to require, because it is a different approach. It is truly a reconsideration of some aspects of education in the province, and we need to not just support the teachers doing it, but we need to back that up with some support in schools. So that big number, the $1.5 billion, that's a larger investment just in K-12 education, and then we have some separate programs that are over and above that, and that's what you're the ones you're naming.